And that's where it started for us. And this is probably late 2012, early 2013. Um, so we go about our group, and we would probably run our own queues, right? So we'd get a blind pool generator together, or give somebody that was all-time project manager at the time, Michael, all the queues, and he would run the projects, and we'd slowly run through and do projects and that sort of stuff, UFOs, personal targets, spiritual targets, monetary trajectories, and those sorts of things. And it wasn't really until about early 2015 where we got another one of these sort of targets. And that one was the most significant remote viewing target, meaning that singular, what's the most important thing in the world that I could possibly look at as a remote viewer?
The manager asked that. That was the question.
Mm-hmm.
So that was the
Yep.
target. What could be the most? That's as broad
Yep.
as it can possibly get, right?
Yep.
It's like,
And what popped out essentially at the end of the call, because at that point, like, the analysis was really, really heavy pre-queue analysis. So everybody runs their session work, they give it back to the project manager, and a day or two later, that person will give us the follow on, what else they'd like us to take a look at based on the information that we get in our technical remote viewing site template. And after everyone's finished, we sit down and we have the chat. And at that point, we're all starting to describe these life forms that are dying, and this idea of a trap and a box, and these souls being, or I don't want to say souls, but these no longer living entities are now being put into this box, and this idea of a bright light. And we're all talking about it. We're all talking about it. We don't even know what the target is yet at this point, but we came fairly conclusively 4 or 5 out of 5 viewers at that point, and all said the same thing: the light tunnel after death is a trap. And then we see Q reveal. Now, at that point, like, how do we really get much feedback on it? Well, there's plenty NDE stuff out there about the situation. There's many written texts out there about that particular concept or idea. And at that point, we had run probably 3 or 4 blind targets at the time on the most significant remote viewing target, what we call as a topical search of reality. And a topical search is essentially, we don't know what the question is, what we're asking. What is this word, idea, concept to the collective unconscious? And what does it mean? And then that starts coming out. And then in that particular work, it described, like, in my particular session, it was about this bubble of influence around you, whether it's 3 to 6 feet, anybody can argue about the details on that. And that this bubble follows along a track. And every, now and then there are inflection points, but ultimately this track leads to one place. You've got many different options while on the track, but the track is ultimately going to the same spot. And that, we get to that a little bit later about free will and destiny. But we look at reality at that point, and then the idea of reality's source, or the source of reality, where is it coming from? And this idea of it being projected from somewhere came out of that particular session. That's the general metaphor coming out of the situation with 4 blind remote viewers. And we're running all these targets. Like, we were running 2 or 3 targets a week at the time, which is a heavy, heavy load. We were ultra sharp at the time, and still are, but just that much work, you just tend to be that much better every time. Your unconscious learns through this process. If you keep it more novel, your unconscious gets more efficient in the way it gives you this information. So we get to the reality stuff, and then Michael is the project manager, and he pops in the idea of moksha. And I had no idea what that meant. I never had seen or heard the word before, but then this idea of escaping the cycle of reincarnation. And again, we start getting more stuff related to the light trap in the box, and how to not stay in this life anymore, or in this system anymore. And at that point, things kind of took toll. Every time the paradigm is adjusted by each result from each project. And again, we're running 2 or 3 a week. So what we think is the world, or what the world paradigm is what's going on here, changes a couple times throughout the week. And we never had time to kind of cope with the information. So it took us a couple of years to really be at peace with the information.
Dan, can you share, if you remember, how you came out of that session? Like, when you were looking at your data, when you were analyzing what you had, What was your state of mind, your state of spirit, maybe?
Sounds about right. I hate to say it that way, but growing up the way I grew up and living the life that I've lived, it just at the time the mentality was more towards negative. And ultimately, the end of this story, I do want to stress at some point, maybe once we get further down the road, or maybe perhaps some other time, that ultimately the message with all this information is positive. But at the time, it's like, yep, sounds about. I was really just in awe of the process of how everyone together were basically saying the same thing. Sometimes the gestalt of information has a wide diaspora. Say it's a really big picture we're trying to describe. You'll get two viewers that kind of anchor on one section of the story, two other viewers that are sectioning on another end of the story, and then you have like a linchpin person in the middle with whatever they're producing has aspects of all four of the other ones. And if I remember correctly, in that particular project, it was like that, and I was just dumbfounded, not dumbfounded, but just in awe of the process at the time. And ultimately, my personal paradigm or view was basically, yeah, that sounds about right. And then probably like 2 to 3 targets later is when we had the moksha
Mhm.
topical search. And then when that corroborated back so much extra information, it's, I wouldn't say it's 100% conclusive, but it's a high percentile at that point of what we've got. And well, if it's all being done blind and it's all matching up, like if it walks like a duck, talks like a duck, maybe just maybe it's a duck.
Can you
And
talk about
that's
that?
kind of where it was.
Can you talk about that
I was,
moksha project? Was it a one-word target? Really?
yeah,
Okay.
yeah,
Okay.
topical search. So we didn't know what to ask about it. And in the dialect, as I understand it, it means how to escape the reincarnation cycle, if I remember
Uh,
correctly.
in spiritual
Um,
traditions, the samsara, right? And that's the liberation
yeah.
from it, but that's through spiritual maturation and karmic
Hmm.
release and all that. But what did you
Hmm.
find?
Ultimately, as I recall correctly, it was mostly the idea of don't go in the trap. That was the general idea, as I recall, of it across the general metaphor across everyone's sessions. As far as the details, I'd have to go back and research, um, take a look at it a second, third, fourth, or fifth time at this point. Um, but ultimately, that's the general idea that came out of
Mhm.
it. Morgan, you might have a different recollection than I do.
No, I'm in agreement with that.
Mm-hmm,
Um,
mm-hmm,
sometimes, um, sometimes all you want or need from a particular target is just a general kind of thematic overview. Um, Sometimes you want more specificity and detail. And there were more details in that one, but yeah, as a broad overview, again, it was, we looked at it as, okay, this is basically um reaffirmation of our prior work.
Mhm. Mhm.
And that, well, the intention, but it was Michael was the one who tasked us that target,
yep,
and
yep,
his intention behind it was exactly that: either validate or debunk our previous work.
yeah, yeah,
Had we come out of that with something completely different or completely incongruent results, well, that right there is an indicator that there's something wrong with the target.
Mhm.
Because
Mhm.
it's very unlikely that an entire team is going to just completely miss and bomb, um,
yeah, yeah.
a valid target. So that was kind of the mentality and the strategy behind that one.
In some respects, the way that technical remote viewing had been designed as an intelligence gathering tool, ultimately you're looking for short, succinct, to the point answers. And as far as I recall, that session was one of those sessions, or one of those projects, excuse me, is short, succinct, to the point, don't go in the light. Now again, there were details, but when if you don't have overwhelming corroboration across other remote viewers on one particular detailed point, you generally don't want to stand on that. You generally don't want to proclaim that is 100% factual because it's not corroborated on some of those finer detail points. But across all sessions, it was straight and to the point.
This data does corroborate a lot of the spiritual traditions from various places in the world. From very small tribal knowledge to among the American Indians and so forth. don't go into the light. I've heard that often. Now the question that our viewers have, and some of them have said, listen, I'm in the latter stage of my life, or I'm not in great health. I might be crossing over soon. What does that mean? Don't go into the light. And what alternatively, what's the alternative here? And I have so far, I mean, how could I possibly give a definitive answer to that? But what have you found? Because you've talked about three potential paths that you could take, and you've said so there probably are more. But where are you today on this?
Okay, easy question. I'll handle that. So okay, first, I suppose we should call this a disclaimer. Neither Dan nor I nor anyone on our team is or wants to be a spiritual leader.
Count me in that group, please.
Right on. Yeah, man.
Yeah, the track record's not good for those folks.
Yeah. So the short answer is, I mean, hey, I'm not none of us are probably the one to ask and to, definitively answer that question for you. We obviously are, we're happy to share our data, and we stand firmly behind that data. I mean, I'll just quick segue, but sad state of affairs. But the reality of the situation is, in communities like remote viewing, I see this in the astrology community all the time. There are a lot of people out there who don't actually believe, and they do not actually firmly stand behind what they're putting out.
Oh yeah.
And you've seen it, right? We've all seen it. And I'll tell you right now, I do. I'll reaffirm that again today. I stand behind that. I believe, like, with all my heart, that our data is correct. May we have some details slightly off, of course. But generally speaking, I firmly believe our data to be correct. So the first step in exiting the matrix, if we want to use that kind of phraseology, is not going into the light. That's our strongest data point as it pertains to this particular question. Beyond that, I think it actually gets a little more complicated, because as best we can tell, there is a significant personal kind of individual component or components involved in that process. It seems to hinge largely on how you, I got to be really careful with my words here, with how you react, how you, again, lack of a better word, behave at such a time as you find yourself in that situation. But I think it, again, as probably, well, all religious traditions throughout history would tell us, much of our life should be dedicated to what comes next. So it's not just a matter of, well, what do I do in that moment? It's, well, what do you do in the moments, days, weeks, months, years, decades leading up to that moment? So, as with any potential danger that you may be facing, the first step is to be aware, to acknowledge it and consider it, ponder it. Prepare yourself and know what you think is right to do in that moment. Maybe some people belong in the matrix. Maybe they want to stay in the matrix.
I've met a number of them who say, I want to come back here. And I'm like,
well, they say the steak tastes better here, something like that, right?
and they want to be famous and rich.
Oh, well, yeah. There's a couple of those around too, right?
Jeez, yeah.
But so I think that's probably the most responsible advice that I can give. Is not even necessarily advice, but prepare yourself, live honestly and honorably, truthfully, That right there is going to go a long way towards achieving and maintaining discernment. Discernment, of course, being critical in that moment that we're talking about. So, and as you hinted at before, there are other options. It's not just go into the light or don't. You know, it appears that the death process is largely I think of it in terms of it's like a nexus place, a nexus, like a tunnel system. There are other branches on that tunnel too, which again leads to brings us back to earlier in the conversation where you know, I was explaining kind of some of the issues with such a grand scope and scale project as this is to do so diligently. You know, we need to put in extra work. Compared to the level of confidence, you know, that I would place in a more typical, more mundane type of operational RV project. You know, we want to be darn sure that we're on solid ground before we start talking about any of this publicly. That's been a problem in the past. It's a problem that persists to this day. But and the other problem is for every solid foot of ground we gain, we discover 5 new questions we didn't know to ask before. So just imagine it just branches out fractally from there. And again, you know, we're a volunteer team. Intuitive Underground is not a commercial entity. It's a volunteer organization. So, you know, we do the best we can with what we've got. And as far as yeah, there are some strategic targeting strategies, any number of them. But at this point in particular, it becomes a matter of necessity to deploy the team ultra strategically, because you could think of it, there's almost a point of diminishing returns. Maybe diminishing returns isn't actually quite correct, but you know, how much specificity and detail do you need in answer to every single question? Because bearing in mind, every question is at least one medium to large scale remote viewing project, and that's significant man hours input required to get to the, again, just gaining one more foot of solid ground to stand on. So, well, you get the idea.
Oh yeah, absolutely. There's a big subject that I want to tap into in just a little bit. But I want to rewind a little bit, Dan. There was talk about this mass extinction event, and then this harvesting of this energy that is sort of released. Do you guys have more data on this event?
I'm not sure if there's really great detail we could share with that. Much like the idea of what to do after you passed on, it seems, at least to me, individually, my suggestion or hypothesis about the situation is it's all deeply personal. I hearken back, and this is kind of where I kind of get into a paradox of the idea of realities and what does that mean for each individual person. Your 3 to 6 foot bubble that you've got influence over. It might be something different to every, you know, certain groups of people who view something. Let's just say if it was a solar event, you know, some people of a certain religion might view it a certain way. People of agnostic means might view it as a different thing. And then if you were to come from a new age sort of thing, you know, it might be a judgment day sort of thing. There is many instances in the past, not only from what we would learn from Ed Dames and his MI team, that published a lot of their information, what they called kill shot, where in which a large amount of solar flares happen. You've got Other people in the conventional world, more scientific based, are talking about a pole shift. Others are talking about, I don't want to say this, earth changes.
Mhm.
And it could be fair to say that it's all of the above. May not all be at one time. The best that I'd come across that might suggest, and this is not based on our data, that this might be a series of events that cause one causes the other, and then so forth until things kind of settle down. But ultimately, the idea of a galactic sized energy sheet that we should have some information on here shortly if we do see the star Betelgeuse give some sort of supernova that would affect our solar system. This section of science actually suggests that it's already starting to show in the temperature changes of the other planets within the solar system,
Mhm.
the activity of the sun over the last, say, 20 years. I'm not sure how old you are, but I do recall it being yellow as a child.
I do.
Now
Very much
it's
it's
pure
white.
white.
Yeah.
So, we have other things outside of remote viewing. Now, can we sit 100% on every section of these things and be able to reason with the other things that we see? And it does seem to be, at least in my personal opinion, that these things are all connected,
Mhm.
and that we're looking at some sort of either it's coronal mass ejections, polar shift, and resulting Earth changes because of such a thing. It seems to me that we're living in this time of, whether you want to call it revelation or apocalypse, but a general revealing of many different things on all different levels. It's difficult for me to say with any authority that what I believe to be 100% true, or at least even 80% true, is the truth. It's more of a personal thing, and I think a lot of your viewers would probably agree as well, that something along those lines of what we've just described is what we're looking at. And how fast? Some say 2030, some say 2035, some say 2040. It's my own personal opinion or understanding or knowing that I'm going to be alive to see it. So what that looks like going forward, I'm not sure. And I would probably argue that it's going to be different to every person. Does that make sense?
That makes total sense because it mirrors what many people have come to in their own introspection, sort of without talking to each other. And then we sit together and everybody sort of says the same thing. It might be different to different groups of people. To some, it's the great disaster that they anticipated. To others, it is actually a potentially beautiful thing. I mean, to say something like that sounds crazy, but I
Right.
agree with that, with how you see it too. I want to talk a little bit about, when you say, Morgan, when you say words like the matrix, the simulation, and once again, we have such a hard time putting language to this concept because only recently have we gained this technological understanding of what that could even mean. Like, think back 60 years, 70 years, 80 years, no one could have even imagined what that could be. So, but when we talk about something that is artificially put into place to keep us either in a certain perceptual bandwidth, whatever you want to call it, if that exists, what is prime reality? What is the real thing, so to speak? Or what is it based on? Do you guys have data on that?
Yeah, really important to this larger topic to make some distinctions here. We kind of tend to use the word simulation conversationally just because it's probably the most common word describing the gist of things in the societal zeitgeist. Largely because of simulation matrix. It's a pop culture reference point, basically. I would very strongly contend that, as a matter of fact, the reality of the situation, while the word simulation applies, it absolutely applies. It's not It's not a simulation in terms of how we would think of it, in the common vernacular. We would think of it as, a computer simulation, a digital, like a purely computer, like a binary electronic thing that does not exist outwardly in any physical form. The distinction here is that this simulation appears to, the best word that, and my preferred word to describe it, is actually a dream. What we have in speaking, in terms of cosmology here, is we have a quote unquote a real world, a real physical world out there, not here. In that physical world, there was some sort of interspecies war. The losing parties of that war, of which we were one, were effectively coerced into participating in what we would consider, again, in our modern, societal, through that lens, highly unethical medical and other experiments. Part of this greater experiment was putting people into a state of something like suspended animation or like a coma, something like that, in vats of fluid, and effectively wiring these people's minds together, regulated by a central technological source. So what we're actually looking at is an induced and a shared regulated dream state between all these people. And that is, I will use the term, in fact, according to our data, that is the world that we inhabit and experience right here, right now. We would consider that we are living in a dream right now. There's a little bit more into Matrix, kind of looked at it more of just like an a human battery and kind of a simulation thing, but it appears there's more, there's a little more to it than that. It's not, when we use the term battery, while we do mean, powering things, powering the simulation, for one, it kind of brings up a larger conversation about energy, what really is energy, what constitutes energy, energy harvesting and production, and what can be done with it. I would suggest that, for lack of a better term, what they're working with is the manipulation of that soul or spirit or essence kind of energy. And again, that's a little outside of let's say conventional power engineering. So exactly what does that mean? I'm not exactly sure, but we have some ideas that I think could probably be best summarized by saying the energy being harvested by these in these experiments is being used to traverse reality and manipulate reality. I think that's probably the big difference in terms of the energetic potential that we're dealing with there. So just briefly, I want to add that this world here, as best we can tell, the term that keeps coming up with the word is, this is like a mirror reality. So this effectively, just like when any of us goes to sleep at night and dream, we create yet another basically mirror reality, right? It largely mirrors the world that we inhabit. There are certain minor differences, some kind of significant differences, but in terms of the general landscape, and just the general world around you in the dream world, it's very much like this one. Just like this one is very much mirroring the external, quote unquote, true base reality.
Dan, have you guys been able to view prime reality, prime Earth, maybe prime physical reality, where these pods are located, where we actually originate from?
Some of which, yes. Not a full encompassing mosaic of what it is over there, but it's very much like here. A lot of nature, a lot less people running around. How else do I want to say? We have this general idea of where this simulation dream is being not really, transmitted from in some respects. And that's generally about it. Is a large concept, is that it's very much like here, a lot less people, and there's some sort of old megalithic style stone architecture where these things are occurring basically in the underground catacombs of this. It's not like a castle or anything like that. It seems as if there's other stuff going on in the upper floors, but ultimately there's some sort of transmitter on the roof of this thing. That, as I understand it, is what I'm willing to say for sure.
Mm-hmm.
One thing I did want to harken back on this idea of matrix and things popping out into our current reality is that it appears as if intuition plays a role in the creative process. Jean Baudrillard of like the late 80s and early 90s, I believe that's when he published the book, somewhere in the mid 80s. Simulation and the Simulacra
Yeah.
is what the movie was based on. The script was developed from there. I'm not sure if they ever had any contact with him or not, because I can't remember the time. It's about 2099 when that first movie came out. So I'm not sure if he was still alive at that point. I can't remember. I want to say he was with us until about 2000, 2005. But we find that these large archetypes that are present in the collective human unconscious sort of bleed their way into this dream or reality. You could make the argument for art, for music, that there's some level of intuitive nature to it. There are some other people out there who have developed systems around this idea to try and generate some sort of predictive technology. It seems as if there's some level of accuracy to what this person has been doing. But I just wanted to kind of stress that point, because I could hear the people in the comments, at least on our channel anyway, talking about, well, you guys just, you watch too much movies or whatever, and, trying to dismiss the overall information that movie was developed from concepts. I'm not sure if I'm willing to call him a philosopher, but he was a very big thinker in his time. And so, yeah, generally the idea, very much like here, a lot less people, and there's some nefarious stuff going on that is going on because of some sort of small fine print legalese with some level of authority. And what that authority is, I can only venture to guess. We don't have data on that. This small print legalese essentially operates on our consent. Again, this idea of walking into the lake because it's warm, because you see dead relatives, because it feels like the right thing to do in a very chaotic situation at the point of death. This whole system had been basically put up and instituted due to some sort of conquering that was based on this idea of small fine print legalese. And ultimately everything revolves around our consent, and generally people being tricked into giving their consent, if that makes any sense.